All right.
This meeting is being recorded.
All right, so now that we all say we've got it, we can go on, right? So I'm speaking from ancestral Tiwa land, and I'd like just to honor especially the traditional foodways and wisdom that Tiwa Pueblos used in this river valley to tend to the soil, both to grow and gather food, and in harmony with the living land. Okay, so while people are still joining us, I'd like to do a quick introduction, beginning with a question, and that is, have you eaten yet this evening? I was sort of talking to people about this, or maybe you're eating right now, it's okay. It's okay to join us for supper, but if you answered in the affirmative, one of the most urgent questions every person on the planet has to answer every single day is, what's for dinner? And your answer to that question is really why we're here tonight. Perhaps you associate 350 New Mexico with renewable energy or electric vehicles, fighting fossil fuel pipelines and championing UNM's divestment from fossil fuels. So perhaps you're wondering, why are we hosting an event about healthy soil? Some of you are probably familiar with the book Drawdown, edited by Paul Hawken, which outlines a totally comprehensive plan to stop global warming. It's divided into several different general categories of topics that we need to change, starting with energy and moving through topics of women and girls, buildings and cities, land use, and so on. But you may not be aware that following right after energy in this book is the category of food. There are many ways of calculating the impact food has on climate change, but I was recently reading a piece from scientists at MIT, their program called Farming for a Warmer Planet, and they say that as much as 1/3 of all human-caused greenhouse gas emissions arise from that daily question, what's for dinner? The food-related greenhouse gases come all along the food chain, from production, from use of farm equipment, those giant tractors, to little shovels, energy used for irrigation, greenhouse gases emitted during shipping, food processing, packaging, canning, freezing, keeping food warm, keeping food cold, cooking in our homes. And in addition to that, food's impact on climate also includes, as a huge hit, clearing established forest in order to create farmland. That's a big one. Fertilizer production and use, which contributes huge amounts of the extremely potent gas nitrous oxide into the atmosphere, much more potent than even methane. Large amounts of methane coming from cattle burps, rice farming, and then finally just simply tilling the soil, which actually releases greenhouse gases just in that process. So tonight we're going to tackle a single but very important aspect of that food production that most of us never give much thought to at all, and that is the soil in which our food is grown. Why does our food need to be healthy? And what benefits can healthy soil bring to us, to the farmers and farm workers who produce our food, and to our climate? And what can we as an audience here tonight do to help? So with that, I'd like to welcome and introduce two speakers tonight from the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group, Isabelle Jenniches and Claudia Reynoso. So Isabelle, I think you're going to begin, and welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Tom, for the invitation and the great introduction. My name is Isabelle Jenniches. I'm in Ogapoke, also known as Santa Fe. And I'm the co-founder of the New Mexico Healthy Soil Working Group. I'm really happy to be here because, as Nancy mentioned, agriculture and climate change has become more known, the connection recently, but climate change and environmentalists don't necessarily think of it in very positive ways, let's just say. So especially recently, I'm sure you've seen the opinion pieces in the New York Times, and there was a lot of good facts in that, but also unfortunately some misinformation. And we see it a lot on social media these days. So I'm hoping to clear some of this up today. And I'm really, really happy to be here with you. So with that, I will actually share my screen and start a slideshow here. Give me a minute. Okay. Okay, and I will start with the presentation, and then my colleague Claudia Reynoso will chime in a little later. So this this quote from Wendell Berry, I have to say, has been guiding my work for quite a while. Be joyful, though you have considered all the facts. I will share some facts with you, but I hope that they don't leave you joyless, but rather joyful, because we do need to keep hope while we are doing this work. So one of the hard facts to contend with is that humanity has changed the climate, and we are still changing it. And as Nancy very, very eloquently talked about in her introduction, quite a bit of that change has come due to agriculture. And so as this picture shows, this is not just any agriculture, because you can actually feed yourself and grow food in a sustainable and even regenerative way. But what has become the norm around the world and really has been exported is industrial chemical agriculture in the last maybe 100 years or so. So it's really important to remember that this is an outcome of a Western mindset, of a mindset that separates humans from the rest of the living world, animals, plants, and the soil. It's also important to remember that this has not always been this way. When European settlers came to North America, it's sometimes referred to as a garden, that they didn't really know what they were seeing, but there was definitely practices in place here by the indigenous peoples that that were sort of, you could call them farming. They were managing, for sure, the ecosystem, but they were managing in such a way that it was able to renew itself, and they were just more or less encouraging the aspects of the ecosystem that were important for food, and maybe discouraging others, but not in the sort of way that we're used to now, which is really raising all the plants off, and you know, as you see in this picture, making a bare soil and plowing and all of that. So that was very different back then. And it's something that we would do well to learn from. So I do want to tip my hat to those early peoples that are still here, and I would encourage everyone to learn from them. So again, I will start with some perhaps uncomfortable facts. As Nancy said in the beginning, there is a lot of the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, come from agriculture and the food system, and depending on how you look at it. So if you only look at agriculture as it's reported by the EPA, it is about 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions. But if you then add to that transportation and you know, other aspects of the whole food systems, that's how you get a much larger slice of the pie that is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions that are connected to agriculture. So how do they actually come to be? And again, Nancy mentioned it already. This is kind of an incredible graph. Actually, I'm indebted to the Environmental Law Institute for creating these graphs. As you can see, soil management, by far the biggest emitter. The piece of the story that has gotten the most attention recently is perhaps cow burps. And there is a lot of misconceptions about that because yes, cows burp, but they it depends a lot how cows are managed, how cows are held, if it's in a confined system, and if you have, you know, these very large pools of manure and urine that are, you know, these horrible pools that are out in the open, sometimes covered, and that are polluting. So that is a very different situation than if you have a grass-fed operation, ranching operation, where actually the cow burps can be offset by the amount of carbon that gets stored in the soil. And we will talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want to put kind of an asterisk on the current conversation that I find is lacking so much detail. So it really matters how a cow is raised, and there's this sort of phrase, it's not the cow, it's the how, right? So I hope you might remember that, and I'm happy to talk more about that perhaps also in the Q&A, because I see a lot of emotions and not a lot of understanding about that. But back to agricultural soil management, as you can see, it's really responsible for a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and a lot of that comes from, again, as Nancy mentioned, the tillage for certain, but also chemicals that are produced from fossil fuels, chemical fertilizers, and all of that releasing gases into the atmosphere that are unfortunately heating up the planet. So this tells the opposite story, which again, I don't see like in the pieces in the New York Times, there was no mention of agriculture being actually able to provide a solution to climate change, which honestly is how I got involved with this work. I was growing food and farming, and then I heard that soil can actually store soil carbon, so greenhouse gases in the soil. That's when I got really excited and I got involved, and I wanted to spread that message. But you don't hear nearly enough about that. It's such a potent solution, and so that's honestly why I'm here today. It's a little bit different. It's a little bit difficult to put exact numbers on how much carbon can actually be stored that way. This is an attempt at trying to do that. I've included it here with a little bit of a caveat, and just to give some examples of management options that are able to do good instead of have the greenhouse gas effect become worse. So let's take a step back and really talk about what is soil. And so this pie chart is basically how soil is put together. And what is important about that is, if you look here, okay, so here we have minerals, basically rock or whatever you have as a kind of parent material. And I think a lot of us are used to the idea that soil is basically the weathering of rock. So it takes a long time. Sometimes it's mentioned even 1,000 years to create soil. Well, in recent years, we've come to know that that's not always true, although it has, and it's an aspect of soil building. But really what's important for soil building is the soil biology, the microorganisms in the soil. And they live in this other part of the soil, which is, water, air, and organic matter. So they need organic matter to feed. And then also water and air, like all living organisms, they need that to breathe and to drink. What I find really interesting about that is that more than 50% of soil is sort of negative space. And that's something to really conjure up in your mind, like as an image. I've heard it referred to as a cathedral underground. But basically that's the housing for the soil organisms, where they can live. So it's as much as over 50% of the soil is home to soil organisms. So what is healthy soil? basically, here's the USDA definition. Soil health is defined as the continued capacity of a soil to function as a living, vital ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And so really that is a very holistic view of soil. And as this little graphic illustrates, it's not seen in isolation, but rather in constant communication and engaged in exchanges with all these other living things and plants. So it's a very vital, vibrant, amazing ecosystem that we don't usually see and perhaps spend enough time thinking about because it's underground. So really healthy soil is full of life, and it also can fix carbon. So that is the piece that connects us tonight to the climate change discussion. So how does it actually work? Well, basically it's photosynthesis. So you have CO2 in the air, too much, unfortunately, right now, but luckily plants can breathe that in through their leaves, the stomata, which are sort of pores in the leaves, and really any plant can do that. Trees are often mentioned, as really good for climate change mitigation, but any green plant does the same thing. Trees are just bigger. So plants can take CO2 out of the atmosphere and convert it into sugars. Some of those sugars are used for their own growth, and some of it is actually stored underground in a big exchange, so to speak. So basically, there's microorganisms in the soil. There can be fungi, bacteria. I mean, you have a lot of different, very strange organisms, and I believe only 5% of those are actually known right now. In a teaspoon of soil, you have more organisms than we have people on Earth. So just let that sink in. So this exchange takes place in the root zone, where the plants excrete the carbohydrates as feed or food for the microorganisms, and the microorganisms, the microbes, are able to mine and bring to the roots minerals and other nutrients that are in the soil that are otherwise not accessible for the plant. So this is a very important and actually necessary exchange that takes place all the time. So whenever you have a green plant, it's engaged in this exchange with soil microbes. So this graphic, and again, I'm actually, I want to say thank you to Kiss the Ground for these graphics. This shows very impressively, I think, how much carbon is in the atmosphere, a lot, in the biosphere, which is basically, all the living plant matter, also a lot. But then look at the numbers for the pedosphere, which is the soil, the area of the soil, a lot more. And so there is so much potential here. So we've removed a lot of carbon from the soil since the Industrial Revolution, but the mechanisms to put it back where it belongs still exist through this big exchange that I just described. Because as this exchange is taking place, the carbon from the atmosphere travels through the plant into and then out through the roots to the microbes. And as the microbes die, the carbon actually gets deposited in a stable form in the soil. So they also bind it in the soil in a stable form. So that is basically how it works. And it's a wonderful thing that nature provides us with, and we only have to create conditions to encourage and let it do its good work. The other piece of this is the carbon cycle is just kind of one half of the really important aspect. The other aspect that's really important is also the water cycle. And again, I can only sort of touch on that in this short talk, but basically so important for our arid environment is that if you have bare, compacted, depleted soil, it gets a lot hotter and it creates that sort of heat island effect that you might have heard about, talked about within an urban context, but the same is true within a bare soil context or a depleted soil context. So you create a negative feedback loop where you know, you get a haze cover and you get less rain, whereas if you have what's sometimes referred to as the soil carbon sponge, so I'm a healthy soil with lots of life in it and lots of porosity because of that life, then you can create a positive feedback loop that actually creates local rainfall. Also sometimes referred to as the biotic pump. So I mean, for now, I think that suffice, but there's a lot more to it. But a really important piece to remember in our arid environment. So how do you actually create healthy soils? And our group really talks a lot, and you might have heard it, the soil health principles. And I'm going to give the microphone to my colleague Claudia in Reynoso to talk a little bit about the soil health principles.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Isabelle. Yes, soil health is amazing and great to learn about, and we want to know how we can build that soil. So really taking in these principles helps put us in that mindset, puts me in that mindset. And one of the first things you want to consider is your context. So every place has its history and unique strengths and vulnerabilities. Understanding the context of the land and its inhabitants is central to being a good caretaker and will inform how best to apply the soil health principles. So we're going to start with keeping the soil covered. So think about the soil as an organism and then about the necessities to provide it with. So one of them is protection, shelter from the elements, wind, heat, and pounding. So you want to make sure that your soil is covered. And some of those examples of how to keep it covered is a living cover. So you can't see any bare ground in this image because it is absolutely covered all the way across its surface. And this really keeps it protected from that pounding wind or that pounding water and wind and all of the other elements that lift your soil up. Mulching is another example of keeping your ground covered. Mulching can also be compost and anything else that you can put on top of your soil if it's not completely covered by plants. And then you want to minimize your disturbance. This is a complement to maximizing soil cover. So while cover works from the surface of the soil, minimizing disturbance helps to promote and protect the inner workings of the soil. So it really helps to protect what's going on underneath. And some examples of that are going to be no-till, and this is these are tools from the Pueblo Farming Project in this example. And the next one is no chemicals. So you want, with no tilling, you also want to reduce the amount of chemicals that come into your onto your soil. And this is where compost can really help bring in some of those beneficial nutrients without adding those synthetic or large amounts of fertilizer and other components that you would normally put on your soil. The next healthy soil health principle is maximizing biodiversity. So we know that there are more living organisms in a single spoonful of soil than there are people on Earth. And we're learning more all the time about how important these organisms are in maintaining a healthy soil. So maximizing biodiversity starts with maximizing the species of plants in the area. And that will really promote the biodiversity that goes on below. So as above, so below. is what you can think about when maximizing that biodiversity. And some examples are cover crops. You can add a lot of cover crops that have various root depth, various root fibrosity. So that way you can increase all of those little living spaces, and having those different niches is going to help increase that biodiversity. Another example is planned grazing. So cows have gotten a lot of bad rap, but when managed using the principles of Mother Nature, they are key to building soils on rangelands. In a nutshell, again, we mimic nature and the movement of large herds of ungulates through the grasslands. And these would have been bunched and kept on the move by predators. So if we do some rotational grazing, that kind of mimics that process that's been going on for a long time. And then maintaining a living root. By maximizing living roots, we maximize the volume of soil that the roots occupy, and we maximize the amount and types of liquid carbon exudates that go into the soil. You also, if you have long root systems in some of your plants or cover crops, cash crops, if you have those long root systems, it helps break up that soil deeper down into that subsoil, where you're going to further increase that biodiversity and that pore space and those exudates and the food and everything. And they really just work together to help build that soil. Some examples would be perennials. So perennials are really underutilized in current agriculture systems. And of course, the roots stay in the ground all the time. And orchards and food systems are most common. And usually we see these as windbreaks and hedgerows, but using these in your system will help you build that healthy soil. And further, we want to integrate animals, not just our cows, but we want to integrate wildlife. Some of the amazing benefits of having these large privately owned ranches and farms is that it keeps it from being developed and really opens it up for wildlife. I have geese on my field that come every spring, and I just see their little heads popping up, and it provides space for wildlife and really incorporating it, making sure that the appropriate fences are there for guiding where it's appropriate for wildlife to be. And then your ungulates, small ungulates, sheep or goat, those are really good for multiple reasons. For instance, goats will eat all of those noxious weeds that sometimes require heavy herbicides. And instead of herbicides, you can use these goats to further reduce that disturbance and integrate those animals in order to maximize your soil health. Another one is pigs. Pigs are great, and they do a great job at sniffing out little arthropods and organisms in the soil, and just kind of go in and munch and move that soil in a very natural and low disturbance way, and still getting those nutrients mixed up. And just in general, going through all of your organisms and thinking how to integrate these animals into the system, and working with them and having them work for you as well. So with that, I will. Oh, sorry, Isabelle.
I got caught up.
You got excited. Yeah.
It ran away from me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought I had to speed up, but
No.
yeah, any of the animals that you can think of, they all have amazing benefits for the soil, the plants, and the overall health of the system. earthworms, amazing little scavengers, creatures that open up little pathways for all of those microorganisms in your soil. They move the soil. They do this beautiful job of slowly tilling it from the top to, on top of that subsurface. And your soil fauna, which there is soil fauna, as we've mentioned a few times today, more than there are humans on this earth. They are just fabulous little engineers and workers and really bring that soil health to its maximum stage. And of course, we have a soil food web. This is just a snapshot of the integration and the collaboration between all of these organisms, from your fungi to your plant roots and all of the organic matter that is created based off of that carbon that's being brought in from your atmosphere and placed into your soil and used to make organismal bodies, so on and so forth. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and pass it over back to Isabelle and go over some of the legislative status of healthy soils.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, just a little switch of topic here. I love that. So yeah, Nancy asked me to talk about policy a little bit, because this is really how the working group got started. And I wanted to show you a map of the US and how soil health policy is a big topic right now in all of the US. So this is from just 2 years ago now, this map, and the green is all the states that have passed soil health legislation. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that actually means in a second. But as you can see, New Mexico is proudly here in green, and not a whole lot of other states have passed legislation at that point, although California did certainly. It's not green in this map, but it should be. And so then a year later, a year and a few months later, you can see how many more states have passed soil health legislation. So there is a big movement underway, and a nationwide movement in support of soil health. And policy is really a good way to provide incentives that are available to farmers and ranchers to transition from industrial chemical agriculture to regenerative soil health based agriculture. And we'll look at that as an example here in New Mexico, what that might look like, or what does it look like. So as I mentioned, the Healthy Soil Working Group formed in 2018. We really came together with the goal to pass a Healthy Soil Act in New Mexico. And we wrote a bill based a little bit on examples from other states, but also, came up with some ideas ourselves. The heart of the Healthy Soil Act is the Healthy Soil Program. And again, that is really aimed at supporting farmers and ranchers in soil health. It provides voluntary incentives and education. Tribes, nations, pueblos can apply land grants, acequias, also soil and water conservation districts. We have an equity clause in there, and it's based on the 5 soil health principles that we just learned about. So this bill was actually met with a lot of interest, and our group, did a big stakeholder survey to write it, and we built a large coalition. 350.org did sign on to it in support, which was awesome. A lot of other environmental groups did, as well as agriculture groups, farmer groups, conservation groups. So it was really something that struck a chord with a lot of different stakeholders that sometimes unfortunately find themselves on opposite sides of issues. So it was a really wonderful thing, I have to say. It was very rewarding, and it passed with bipartisan support and was signed into law in 2019 by the governor. And so now New Mexico has a healthy soil program, which is really amazing, under the New Mexico Department of Agriculture. And they are very proud of it and have managed to create a very good program from scratch, which is quite an achievement. It has been funded for now 3 years. It has now recurring funding. So it's really set to go on for a long time, which is very encouraging. We always have, however, more applications than can be awarded. So there's a lot of interest from farmers and ranchers in this program. And because of that, in 2021, last year, our group came up with an idea. So basically, anyone who pays taxes in New Mexico, if they are eligible for a refund of those state taxes, they can now donate those refund, either the whole amount or part of it, to the Healthy Soil Program. And this goes with this, so here's a picture of this PIT D form. There's actually other causes that you can also donate to, but number 18 is the Healthy Soil Program. So that is new this year, and it's the only agricultural option to donate your state tax refund. So if you have, if you're lucky enough to receive a refund, please do consider donating it to the Healthy Soil Program so that more farmers and ranchers can be supported in their soil health practices. And why do we want to support farmers and ranchers? Well, I think we've shown tonight that there's really a lot of benefit in having healthy soils for all of us, for the climate. Frankly, it also creates healthier food. We haven't really talked about that, but we get more and more science behind that. And it is hard for farmers to make that switch. I mean, it's a business that they've run in certain ways. There's often a traditional aspect to it, like my grandpa did it this way, my father did it this way. A lot of our farmers are not young, so it's hard for someone to switch something that they've done their whole life, and it can be very expensive to you have invested in a certain way of doing business. Then you might have to get new equipment, or cover crop seed. It can get expensive if you have a lot of it, and all those kinds of things is something that you can apply for through the Healthy Soil Program to ease that burden, that financial burden, on farmers and ranchers that want to transition to a different kind of agriculture that is more ecologically sound. So that's why I believe that we all need to support the Healthy Soil Program, and it's really a fantastic thing that New Mexico has this this tool in our toolbox in the legislature. This year was, of course, a short session with a budget session, and you again saw a lot of support for the Healthy Soil Program because it was included in the Food, Farm and Hunger initiative that the governor brought forward. And the legislature approved an additional $1 million in funding for the soil program, which is actually together with what's always the recurring funding, it's now the tripling the amount that we used to get. So that is a huge sign of support from the legislature, and it's very hopeful. And so if you're interested to learn more about the Healthy Soil Program, this is the New Mexico Department of Agriculture website, and I can put it in the chat later as well. That's where you can find out how to apply, and the application period will open on March 18. With that, I give it back to Claudia to talk a little bit more about our work as the Healthy Soil Working Group.
Yes, Thank you. Yeah, so great stuff that has been coming through in New Mexico. Very proud of where our state's heading. Thank you, Isabelle, for sharing that with us. You guys visit the New Mexico Healthy Soil .org website. It's amazing. Isabelle does a great job. There's so many amazing resources out there, amazing blogs coming in about how the Healthy Soil program is helping them. As you can see, these to the right, working with ecosystems rather than against it. Soil health, simultaneously progressive and traditional, which is beautiful. We just launched our soil advocates last week. Feel free to email us, find out more about how to get involved. Joining the New Mexico Soil Health Champions Network it's an amazing network of great soil health champions. And then of course our soil stories, which have really shown and highlighted the stories in our community of New Mexico, of all of the people who are working really hard towards being better stewards of the land, and how their journey has intersected with soil health journey. So they are amazing stories, and feel free to tune in and learn more about what our vecinos are doing. But those are great opportunities. And our contact information is on this slide. So if you guys want to contact me about the soil health advocates, feel free at Claudia at newmexicohealthysoil.org. And then Isabelle is just an amazing resource, amazing person to get a hold of if you're interested in learning more or being connected with any opportunities that are coming up. Thank you guys so much for your time. Isabelle, if you have any last words.
No, just the same. Thank you. And I look forward to having a bit more of a conversation. I can't see the chat, but I see that there's a lot of activity. So I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and I think I'll just stop sharing right now. Okay, here we go.
So there was a lot of activity in the chat, but really not that many. There's only really one question. And then Lena G posted a lot about prairie dogs and how important they are. But we'll start with Janice Wall. Her question was, are the farmers at the farmers market part of the Healthy Soil program?
Yeah, okay. So that's a great question. I mean, it's so the Healthy Soil program is, of course, just a grant opportunity, right? So you can care about healthy soil without ever receiving a grant. I think that's obvious, right? So the Healthy Soil program, some people who are at farmers market have received Healthy Soil grants, but it depends if they've applied, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, right? Some people don't like to receive government funding. It is a little bit of work. They already, farmers are already really super busy. So no, not every farmer at farmers market is part of the Healthy Soil program. It just really depends.
And then Lena, I'll get to you in a sec. Cheryl just had a quick question if these Zooms are available for streaming, and we will post this recording on our YouTube channel for 350 New Mexico. And then Lena had, if you want to unmute yourself, Lena, since you had so many comments to talk about, she had several things about prairie dogs, and then also flushing poop into our waterways. Maybe you'd like to bring a few of those comments up. Are you here, Lena?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much for letting me talk a little. So I do have a degree in microbiology. I am a graduate level environmental scientist. I do speak from a lot of experience in this field. Prairie dogs in this ecosystem are critical. They are a keystone species. We are losing them throughout New Mexico. They are considered just a nuisance rodent, and they are as critical to our desert ecosystems as the beavers are to waterways. In fact, I've been contacting the woman who made the beaver movie I forgot which organization is hosting her, to ask her to please do one on prairie dogs because they are so misunderstood and so critical. It's just amazing how they're just attacked. They're used for shooting practice by locals. It's just horrifying what's happened to them. But yeah, so that's besides the point. They do provide tunnels. These tunnels bring water when water does happen, when it does rain in this ecosystem. There's a lot of it helps the water go down into the soil and stay there. A lot of other species rely on their tunnels, such as these rabbits, the jackrabbits and things. And have you noticed that there's now been a great decline in jackrabbits that is directly correlated with the decline in prairie dogs? So little foxes and stuff, they use these their tunnels to live. So they are such a critical species. Now, as for poop, oh my God. I'm sorry, but this is something that just bothers me greatly. Isabelle was correct, only it is one of the poorest understood scientific arenas out there. We don't even understand a quarter of the species and their byproducts and what they provide. You know, a vegan diet, you have to subsidize it now. It is a supreme diet, but it's not sustainable. And why isn't it sustainable? Because our soils are so depleted, and that these microorganisms that do produce a lot of B12, they can be found in wild grasses. So cattle eat it, sheep eat it. And so that's why we're getting it in these, in the species that are higher up on the higher up on the, yeah. So it's just we really need to change the entire way in which we manage waste. Human waste is one of the best to put in soils. Europeans have been doing it forever, but they didn't manage it well. But now our modern understanding of microorganisms and what do you call it, and contaminants, pathogens, we could easily manage human waste to be able to put back into our soils. This mining of resources of phosphorus and nitrogen and ripping up ecosystems, this has got to stop. I mean, this is not sustainable, and it's not the way that God, if you will, planned it for the world. So yeah, thank you.
It's harder to make money at it the other way though, isn't it?
Pardon me?
Anyway, we just have a few more minutes, and there are a few more questions in here, so I'd like to get to those, unless Isabelle has any response to Lena's comments.
Yeah, I think the bigger picture, and Lena basically said that. I mean, it's like getting to a point where we see the interconnectedness of all living beings. I think that is at the heart of our dilemma right now, that we've separated ourselves, and we've separated certain species that are undesired from the rest of the ecosystem. So it's all connected, and if we are farming in nature's image, or we're living in nature's image, that is a better recipe than what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, Claudia, if you want to add to that.
No, that's great. Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, ladies.
Okay, Susan asks, would you tell us how much carbon sequestration helps with climate change and how to maximize it? She said she was dismayed to hear that Peter Donovan does not believe in carbon sequestration.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat, and I actually, I know Peter Donovan a little bit, and I don't think he doesn't believe in it. Again, sort of nuance. So there is a lot of unknowns here in how much carbon actually gets sequestered, how to actually measure it. And so that is, I think, what Peter struggles with as well. And I think it's I've seen people who say, well, if so and so much of the world agriculture would be converted to regenerative, we could capture all of the carbon in the atmosphere. And so, you can make calculations, and they have been attempted. I like to think of it in this way: is like, we know it's happening. How much exactly, we may not know, and for a while, because it's really kind of hard to measure. And so that is more on that. That is the reason why Peter is dismayed, I think. And I honestly share in that. I think that's really prudent not to make any sweeping claims before we can actually quantify how much carbon exactly gets captured. But we know the principles, we know it's happening. So how much exactly? Well, who cares a little bit? It's nice. It's nice to know that there's a solution, and that it's been working for time immemorial, that it's accessible to us, that we can all do it, and that it has no negative byproducts, but only beneficial co-benefits. So I mean, that is so huge in itself that I think the numbers, to me, that's interesting. But at the moment, I don't feel comfortable giving an accurate measurement, I guess. And again, Claudia, if you want to chime in, feel free.
She says, she gave a thumbs up. And I'm sorry, I got confused. I forgot we can go beyond 7:30. So I'm sorry for rushing everybody. Nancy reminded me. Mary, Esther asked, for people who live in apartments without any garden spaces, how can she help support healthy soils?
Good question.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, you can donate to the Healthy Soil Program. Actually, you can donate to the Healthy Soil Program even if you don't have a state tax refund. And you can learn more about that on our website, nmhealthysoil.org. There is a little article that explains it. Basically, you're sending a check to the Department of Agriculture. So that is a good way to do it. That is at this point, well, the other thing that I would say is, yes, shop on farmers market, support your local farmers, talk to farmers and ranchers how they grow the food that they sell. I mean, there's a lot of labels, but I think soil health cuts across a lot of them. So it's really interesting to have those conversations, and then really supporting those that are doing good work is super, super important, right?
And I will add to this one. I'd say that join the soil health advocates, and if not, with a group on your own, going through, joining webinars, passing the information along, all of that helps, even though you aren't necessarily, tending a garden or tending the land. You are passing that information forward. So that's what I would do if I didn't have a space.
Do you want to talk a little more about the soil health advocates?
Yeah, so for the soil health advocates, what I'm encouraging is that we empower each other to find the right fit as to where you want to spend some of that volunteer time. And one of the things that we're looking forward to is doing the Kiss the Ground soil health advocacy training. That way we're well versed in what type of actions will improve our soils. There are other opportunities like tabling or creating content or writing, writing blogs or just passing the information along. And one of the action items is to call the accountants and let them be or inform them about the option to donate some of our state tax refunds, which is a really great way to have that be part of an annual donation. So really getting our accountants up to speed as to what their clients' options are for donating.
Just one other thing on that, Steffi, and I'm not, some public schools have gardens. And if you're interested in supporting gardening in that respect, there's a community garden here. There's, I'm not sure exactly of the status of the Albuquerque program right now, but look for a school that needs a helper, a garden helper, and that would be another place. Get a little training, and that would be a good thing to do as well.
And I have one more. There's so much you can do, apparently. Yeah, composting, right? You can compost even in your apartment. Worms do the magic. So that's a really good one. And then you can maybe donate the compost to the local school or to a friend with a garden or that kind of thing. Very important.
Mary MacArthur asks, how is the Cooperative Extension Service involved? And maybe you could also talk about what Ray Archuleta and the NRCS too, perhaps not specifically with your program, but just in general, how this is being spread around, as it were.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the answer is a little bit, it depends. So we have a lot of different extension offices, and some are more up on soil health than others, but we definitely work with a bunch of them that are awesome. And you have great courses and workshops, and so it just I would say it depends, on how up they are on soil health. It varies. Some are more sort of moored in the prevalent mindset, and others are a bit more forward thinking. I mean, it just depends, right? So NRCS is the National Resource Conservation Service. That is the federal entity for soil health. That is really their expertise, right? So yeah, there is a lot of, and again, they have also grant programs and workshops and all that kind of thing. And Ray Archuleta is actually retired from NRCS, so he's one of the now sort of figureheads of the regenerative movement with the Soil Health Academy. He was in the Kiss the Ground movie. He's from New Mexico, which is so cool. He went to Espanola High School and then to the community college there. So it's very, very cool to have such a good soil health sort of hero, in our state. Yeah.
And there's the Johnson Sioux Perfect Compost for New Mexico, and they're at NMSU. So we have some, if you've never seen Kiss the Ground movie, it's really astounding. That just blew me away. So, we have people here who know what they're doing. You just have
Absolutely.
to find them and encourage them. And
yeah, there's definitely some amazing research being done at MNMSU. I mean, again, there's also research being done that is more in the old paradigm, I would call it. But we're very lucky to have some very forward-thinking scientists that have done now years of research in no-till, in strip till, or I just learned about circular buffers, which is just so cool that you have a native grass buffer strip in those sort of crop circles that are often used, right, to grow sorghum or corn or what have you. And if you have circular grass, perennial grasses, native grasses, buffer strips in there, you don't have to water them, so you save on water. It's good for the pocketbook of the farmer. And it actually helps with attracting beneficial insects, pollinators. It holds water more, so it doesn't run off. and it avoids bare ground, because a lot of the time part of the crop circle is actually left barren, and instead of that you create those buffer circles, which is just such a cool idea. So I'm really excited about those things. And yeah, those are all kind of ideas that come out of NMSU, out of science, and it's just a question of sort of promoting them and having farmers try them out and getting used to that kind of way of managing.
My friend Greg asks, are there things going on for healthy soils outside of the agricultural sector, for instance, wildland restoration or other ecological conservation?
I'll let Claudia talk to that.
Yeah. So that there's New Mexico State Forestry, there's districts who are interested in applying soil health principles to when going into forestry management, and you do a thinning project and you want to make sure that you don't just leave the soil bare and ready to slough off. You want to make sure that that stays sturdy as well. And outside of that would be the main one that I'm particularly familiar with. Yeah, forestry, wildlife. I haven't really heard too much chatter in the wildlife sector, but don't worry, I'm connected with people who are in wildlife, and I'll start talking about soil health principles with them. But yeah, I have heard it mainly in that setting that's outside of agriculture.
Mm. Yeah, a really cool project that comes to mind, since a lot of folks are in Albuquerque, is one that we showed a slide of, the Candelaria Nature Preserve. They actually are regenerating an old farm field that I had pretty depleted soils from decades of tillage and the like, alfalfa fields, I believe it was. And so they've started, and they've received a healthy soil grant, for example, and they started to do cover cropping there last year. And the picture you saw was just so beautiful, lots of different species, and they've definitely seen an increase in wildlife around there. So the idea there is to create kind of a wetland habitat again, and they're starting by regenerating the soils, just as an example.
I think Nancy has a question.
Well, I just wanted, it's sort of connected with that last question and a couple of questions that are in the chat about cattle grazing. So I guess sort of there's also the prairie, especially in the eastern part of the state, the grassland type of landscape. And maybe talk just a little bit more about, there's a comment about cattle grazing being the killer of New Mexico soils and things like that. And maybe you could just talk about that, because it's different when you're farming than when you're grazing animals on a rangeland type situation.
Yeah, and I think the really quick way to answer that is that it depends on how you graze, right? So most of the time what happens right now is that cattle are let out onto a large area, and they're just allowed to go where they please within that larger area. And that can indeed degrade the soil in that it's being overgrazed, because cattle are just like humans. They go for things that they like. They have their ways, and so there are management practices that really mimic nature, and that, like Claudia mentioned, that mimic the movement of large herds of ungulates that used to come here, used to roam here. They used to be held together by the threat of predators, so they were kind of constantly on the move, and in a large bunch, not so spread out. So you can mimic that by dividing your pastures into smaller so-called paddocks. You can use electric fencing for that. And then the most important piece is you really plan it so that you don't overgraze any one area. So you really monitor your forage. You make sure that there's enough rest time, and you circle the animals through. So that is, really in a nutshell how grazing can be done differently, and what you see, and we have lots of examples from that in New Mexico, luckily. So what you see is that by doing this, cattle can be incredibly beneficial, because their hoof action actually tramples, they lodge seeds into the soil, and what seeds there might still be for the native grasses and the forbs. You get much more biodiversity that comes back. They of course fertilize as they go. And also if you manage them correctly, then they don't just eat one kind of grass and, create basically more or less a monoculture here, often of like blue grama grass or that kind of thing. But they really can add to the biodiversity of a place and build soil as they go. So they're really important players in the ecosystem. And so it depends how they are managed. The challenge is to change management from what it is now to a more healthy and considerate agroecological management.
Yeah, and I'd add that it's also the quantity that you put out there, the AUMs, and making sure that you're not putting too many cows out there and stressing the environment. It is about finding that balance and integrating them appropriately. Although it's not the ecosystem, we do, for cows necessarily, we do have grazing animals like elk in our ecosystem, which are also grazers. So they do provide multiple benefits.
I was wondering, New Mexico is such a water vulnerable state, and we are really going to get hotter and drier. And I just wonder if there's going to be a place for agriculture at all in our future. So that's one question, sort of. And the other is, are there any limits to how big a farm you can have with this approach? Because so many farms are industrial farms, and they're not going to do this.
Oh, I wouldn't say that.
Oh, really?
No, I mean, I don't think there's a limit, because we're talking about principles here. They can be scaled up or down. It really doesn't matter, And you do see large farms changing their ways. I mean, I wouldn't dismiss it as something that can only be done by small scale farms. It's true that right now, small scale farms are perhaps more willing to try this out, but there's perhaps less risk. It's interesting. There's some research that shows what size farm is the most vulnerable, and it's actually the one in the middle. So the really small ones are pretty nimble, the large ones are really invested in something, and the ones in the middle are the ones that are actually apparently failing more often. So I mean, so in theory it can be done on any scale. So I wouldn't dismiss it categorically. The other part about water is super, super important, of course, and I don't think we've mentioned it enough today, but healthy soils hold so much more water. It's really like the sponge image, right? So when you have a compacted, depleted, degraded soil, any water that falls from the sky will just more or less run off and not soak in and be of no use. But if you have a healthy soil that is built like a sponge with that porosity, with all the healthy soil life in it, it can absorb the rain that we do get, or any irrigation water that you might have, and make much better use of it. So I think that is so important to remember when we talk about soil health, the connection between soil and water.
And if it doesn't dry out, then it doesn't absorb the heat from the sun and perpetuate that feedback cycle too, which is good.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There for all of you still here, there's just been such a great conversation going on in the chat. I hope you all have an opportunity to see that about cows and everything, and buffalo, and whether New Mexico really is a place for large cattle, and also dairies. Do you think it's appropriate for dairies to be in New Mexico?
You know, that is such a good question, and I've been grappling with that, to be honest. We have just one grass-fed dairy in New Mexico, and it's in Bosque Farms, so along the Rio Grande. All other dairies are confined operations, and they're often in places that are otherwise deserts. Basically, you know, you see from, like, if you fly over from Google Images, you see usually a circular irrigated area, and then you know, the confined houses, yeah, the sort of cattle. I don't even know the terminology, and so those, you know, that basically the CAFOs, that is prevalent what's here in New Mexico, with all the environmental and labor and injustices that are coming along with that type of animal agriculture. And I don't honestly know. I wish I had found someone to write a business plan to how to convert a New Mexico CAFO to a grass-fed operation. There is those business plans for, like, dairies on the East Coast, but we have such a different environment here. Like I said, it's basically in a very dry area that is irrigated a little bit, you know, for replacement heifers and to harvest hay. So I think I would love if somebody would write a business plan for people to transition to grass-fed, which would be so much better for the cows, so much better for the environment. But right now, I don't think that exists. So it's something that we should maybe work on.
Interesting.
Well, Nancy, does anyone have any other questions?
Well, yeah, it's
Did I get everyone?
there's definitely a debate going on about how well cattle can adapt to New Mexico. We're bison here on the Eastern Plains before the Americans came and brought the cattle, et cetera, et cetera. So that's an ongoing debate, and I certainly would encourage. There are two other resources that I think Steffi's already put in the holistic management, and Kavira also do a lot of work, especially in the grazing area, with ranching operations and stuff. So they're also good resources for learning more about that aspect of this that I've found really helpful. And I'm a vegetarian, so you know, I don't. But in terms of, and also I've done some work visiting some ranches that use these management practices, and they have made an amazing difference in the landscape. In fact, the ranch that I have visited, the properly grazed cattle and fenced and moved around and everything have encouraged elk and other you know, native species to re-inhabit the land and revive the land. So there's some evidence to that, but I don't know. That's an ongoing long debate that I don't think we're going to solve here tonight. So I don't know, Steffi, are there any other questions that anybody, did we miss?
We have so few people left. If anyone has anyone, you're welcome to unmute.
Yeah.
But I do have a funny story about prairie dogs. It makes me very sad that their numbers are going down. There was a family of prairie dogs that was moved down to Seviedo when I was visiting down there, and they were trying to get them to acclimate. And apparently they had come from Santa Fe And the people, some group in Santa Fe was worried they wouldn't acclimate and they would come down and secretly feed them trail mix because they were worried they wouldn't survive. And the people down there were trying to make them go away so they would learn how to fend on their own. I hope that's not why they're going, extinct, because they can't get trail mix down there. But I'm sorry to hear that they're not doing well.
Okay, here's a news tip. If you really want to just sit and watch prairie dogs, you can go to Cuba, New Mexico, to the public library, and you can sit in the reading room and watch their backyard is full of prairie dogs. And I used to have a friend who lived up there, and one of the most fun things you can do is just go sit in the library and watch the prairie dogs. You can do it for hours. So thank you, Lena, for
Yeah, maybe she
that
could
support.
tell us why they're failing. Is it because of habitat destruction, or one of the I listened to the IPCC press conference today, and one of the things, the first time I've heard people talk about habitat loss for humans, because there's not going to be enough place for us to live.
Mhm. Yeah. Our shrinking world. Well,